All right, fans, hello and welcome. This is John Franklin with the Combat Press. Welcome to the World Series of Fighting 29 post-fight show. I am joined this week by Nicholas Peralta of MMA Outsiders. We're going to take you through all the relevant fights, all the relevant action, talk about how we're going to move things forward. Nick was on site, so he'll give us that perspective, and then let's get into it. Nick, how you doing?
I'm doing good, John. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good. So let's start with the obvious question. You were at the event in Greeley, Colorado. Give me an idea, sort of how the crowd was, how the venue was. You've been to other World Series of Fighting events before. How did this compare?
It really wasn't a league of its own. This event seemed it had this feel of a really big event. It kind of fits with the main event that they had. It was a great event. It was in Colorado, and believe it or not, the fans were so into it. And I mean, the event apparently had sold out. Now, when I heard about that, I was kind of questioning it. But when I got there, and even by the time the main event had hit, you could see those seats were packed, and those fans were on their feet, and they were loving it.
All right, so what do you attribute that to? Is it a Justin Gaethje thing? I mean, it was in Colorado. He does well in Arizona. Do you think that the World Series of Fighting is gaining momentum, or do you think this is just a Justin Gaethje, Brian Foster, this is a highly anticipated fight kind of thing?
Well, I think it could be a matter of both things. And, one of the things about the World Series of Fighting, first off, is that when they go to these markets that generally you don't see big-time mainstream events at, people are going to come because it's a rare thing for them to be a part of, So, I mean, I think that this show was semi one of those things. And then you have Gaethje, who trains at the Grudge Training Center, a very famous Colorado gym. And as well as Brian Foster, who also trains out in Colorado. So by the time that main event hit, you had this crowd that was supporting for one fighter or the other. But despite that, they were in it. They were into this fight. And you could tell the energy going into that main event right as it was being introduced. Those fans were loud. It had the feel of a big-time fight, and it certainly fit that mold, especially when we were talking about it during the pre-fight talk.
I agree. I mean, I thought I was going to get more out of the main event, so let's get right into it. It was a victory for Justin Gaethje in the very first round. Ultimately, it was by taking out Brian Foster's legs. But Brian Foster, I mean, I thought he showed himself well in this fight. Were you surprised by the way the fight went?
I mean, I can't be surprised when you see a finish from two guys that are just known finishers. But was I surprised that it ended in that fashion? Definitely. I mean, both guys were getting in their shots, but it seemed like Gaethje was, setting up that leg kick. I mean, he was throwing it early and often from the very start of the bell until the fight was done. I mean, he threw some petty leg kicks to start with, but once he knew he was damaging Foster's leg, he started throwing them with much purpose, So the second it landed over the kneecap, Foster gave it more attention than he was giving Gaethje. And the second he did that, Gaethje knew that he was hurt, and he smelled blood, and he went for the kill. And sure enough, and there it was, about a half a minute left later on in the round.
So, yeah, it was impressive. Like I said, Brian Foster, again, was pushing forward, and we'll take a look at some pictures of some of Brian Foster's offense. You were there. When you saw him pushing forward in that way, did you think, okay, this fight is going to be different, or did you think that this is a recipe for disaster?
Well, I mean, when it came to Foster coming forward, I mean, he was obviously the aggressor early. He came forward. He tried to set up that jab uppercut combination. He actually landed one uppercut in a mild exchange that they both had within the opening minute. And actually, I believe he split Gaethje's lip open. I mean, he got in his licks. He put in some damage against Gaethje. But when you're Gaethje, a guy who's always coming forward, a guy who's always willing to exchange, who's basically willing to get in there and brawl with you to land his shots, that's going to happen. But Gaethje seemed unwary by it. He didn't allow it to stray him away from whatever game plan he really had or didn't have going into it. He just knew he sensed the kill once he had Foster's legs hurt, and to him, that was all that mattered after that.
I agree. So let's spin this thing forward. Let's talk about Justin Gaethje and Brian Foster moving forward. We'll start with Brian Foster. For now, the MRI results aren't back yet. He thinks the knee's damaged. He could be on the shelf for a little bit. Do you think that Brian Foster put so many chips into the center of the poker table with this fight that he can't come back from it, or do you think there's more left in the tank as far as his career goes?
Well, man, I don't know. He's been in the game a long time. He certainly this isn't his first title fight. This isn't his first big fight. This is certainly his biggest fight, arguably. But I mean, when you he's certainly worked hard to get here to this point. But I mean, at the same time, he is new to the lightweight scene when it comes to fighting, top quality lightweights and competition in this division. So it's not a crazy thing to talk about when you say Brian Foster could find himself back in the lightweight title picture sometime down the line.
I agree, and I think the move for Brian Foster, and I wrote about this, is that I think that when you're healthy, I think it's time to call out the rest of the division. I mean, obviously, Justin Gaethje, and we'll talk about him in a sec, seems to have an eye on a certain opponent forthcoming. But for Foster, I think you go after Ozzy Dagulagab. I think you go after Mike Ricci, somebody like that who can like reestablish your position in the division. You need to let everybody know, okay, I lost to Gaethje, but kind of like I had an example in my head earlier that it was a way to sort of maybe a little bit like Anderson Silva and Chris Weidman. He needs to start the narrative that this was a fluky win, even though Gaethje did take out his leg. You still have to make it look like you have to make it look like that I was doing my thing and he got me, but I need another chance to prove myself. He needs to start changing the narrative a little bit when healthy. Now let's talk about Justin Gaethje. He called out Jason High in the post-fight. How do you feel about that fight? And he's been talking a little bit about free agency lately. So what do you think the future holds for Justin Gaethje?
Justin Gaethje definitely feels like that's the fight that he wants next. I think at this point he's just kind of trying to hunt out whoever he thinks is going to be tough competition. I think that he himself feels like he needs to be in there with somebody that's really going to test him. And Jason High is certainly one of those guys, but he's not the only name that's out there. I mean, if you also have a guy like Mike Ricci out there, who's a possible opponent as well. I mean, that was a guy who many favored to win the 8-man tournament that Brian Foster eventually won. But Brian Foster actually, that's the fighter whose spot he took to win the tournament. And it's very possible that Mike Ricci could have won that tournament. And, he obviously hasn't suffered any loss other than an injury. It's very possible that we may see him stepping across the cage from Gaethje next. But Jason High is certainly a credible opponent that we may also see. And it's certainly a fight that if Jason High decides to also participate in the narrative that Gaethje is trying to set here, by calling High out, by talking about him, especially in the post-fight interview that I had with him, then it's definitely possible that that's the fight that we see next.
Yeah, I think there's a good and a bad part about Jason High. I think that I like the fight a lot, but I think that Jason High now gives you a common opponent with Rafael Dos Anjos. So I don't know that if he goes in there and just takes it to Jason High that he doesn't start. I mean, who knows? He may be already looking at the UFC. I mean, who isn't? But if you're the World Series of Fighting, I don't know how you play these guys because everybody's. I mean, all fighters are talking about free agency now. Benson Henderson sort of led that charge. Rory McDonald, Marlon Moraes had to sort of clear up some comments that he made today. Justin Gaethje, same thing. They're all sort of talking about, I'm going to do what's best for me, and I get that. But I don't know if you're the World Series of Fighting, do you start to maneuver these guys in a way that you can better control how they move forward to keep them?
I'm not entirely sure that that's like something that's mandatory. I mean, again, you have Gaethje coming out and talking about this fight, being open about wanting that fight next. And Jason High, I'm sure if he once he catches wind that this is a possible fight for him, he's definitely going to want to take the bait and engage in the narrative himself and want to talk about fighting Gaethje next, talking about being the one that's going to beat him and all that. So, I mean, any fighter that comes out of Gaethje's mouth, they're going to take the opportunity to try and get that fight next.
That's true. And just for a little bit of housekeeping, the name that sort of escaped me a little bit earlier was Luis Firmino is the guy who just beat Carlos Fodor. So he could be a guy, and I think that he was ranked he had to be ranked second because Foster was first. So yeah, I mean, if High's the guy, then maybe you call out if you're Gaethje. Gaethje called out High, so maybe if you're Foster, when healthy, you call out a guy like Firmino or something like that to sort of keep your place in the division solidified. All right, so let's move on. I I guess would be considered the co-main event, the spot below Gaethje and Foster on the card. Josh Copeland fought Mike Hayes. It was a unanimous decision, 30-27s all around. For me, this fight felt a little flat. I was surprised by Copeland's. I thought we were going to get a different fight after the way it went down in the first than the entire rest of the fight, and I was surprised in a good way. So let me get your thoughts on Josh Copeland and Mike Hayes.
Well, like you, I was surprised in a good way. I thought that this fight was going to be probably a one-round barn burner that we may see somebody get put down real quick. I mean, we both said that in the pre-fight show, and but Copeland, man, I mean, while the fight wasn't paced in kind of frantic, overly destructive way that we generally see in the heavyweight division, it ended up being a fun show because Copeland fought smart. He fought a well-paced fight because it was working out for him. He was working out this kind of style where he was coming forward, he was looking for that overhand right or the left hook coming in, and he would eventually in the second round, I believe, in midway through it, he was setting those up with a jab, and it kept working for him. Hayes was not, shifting his footwork or his defense any, so it allowed Copeland to continue landing, and he realized that. He realized he also didn't need to overexert himself, and he would continue landing these strikes. And overall, it ended up working for Copeland, so he didn't feel the need to have to go for like a savage kind of kill like you would expect a heavyweight to be looking for. He knew what he was doing was working, and sure enough, it got him all 3 rounds.
I heard a little bit in the pre-fight. I think it was from Joey Varner, and we touched on this a little bit as well. A guy like Mike Hayes, he's been bumped up a little bit in his last 8 fights. I don't think he's won a fight in a real long time. So for him, do you think going in there and taking an ass whooping from Josh Copeland was like a badge of honor? Or it just seemed like he was content to... And listen, I'm the number one guy that says that if you have a flaw in your game that you've taken out of camp, so you brought it into the cage, it's hard to fix that mid-fight because, that's just, a lot of this is muscle memory, a lot of it's drilling. So if there's an opening, the opening might stay there all night. I think fans get frustrated sometimes. They're like, why don't you keep your hands up? It's just not how it works. So, for me, what do you think about Mike Hayes' performance in terms of he took a bit of a beating and didn't seem to be able to offer that much back. There seemed to be some openings here and there. He was game, but he didn't seem to be overly able to take the fight himself.
Yeah, he didn't seem enthusiastic about changing anything, and that was probably the biggest mistake that he made in that fight. He wasn't able to, adapt, really, in that fight. That was the biggest problem. Copeland, again, didn't see a reason to change anything that he was doing. That overhand right and that hook left, setting it behind a jab, that worked throughout the entirety of the fight almost. So, that was the biggest problem, and, of course, that's something he definitely needs to be able to fix in future fights. But good on Copeland for realizing what was working, continuing to use it, and also kind of changing it up as well, because in that third round, there was some clinch exchanges where he was able to see that he could overpower this guy, and that was something I thought that he was going to use early on because we talked about the size difference in this fight. There was about a 30-something pound difference there, and Copeland finally used it in the third round slightly. Like I said, but the biggest mistake Hayes made was not being able to change up what was getting him, basically what was losing him the fight in that throughout the entirety of it.
All right, now let's touch up before we go on to the next fight. Let's touch real quick on the fact that what's surprising about this fight, because I kind of I alluded to it and never paid off that tease. But Josh Copeland, I thought in the first was fighting a fight. He and Hayes both that they had a pace they couldn't keep, and it turned out they kept it. Copeland fought a small man's fight. For a big man, he worked his jab a lot, switching stances. He was sneaky quick, and he seemed to find the openings in Hayes' right down Main Street in Hayes' defense. And I honestly thought these guys were going to be so gassed in the second that was going to be it. But they both maintained their pace, and Copeland, the bigger man, actually fought the smaller man's fight. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, like you said, the way that Copeland fought this fight, the way he paced it, the way he moved, the way he was able to just continuously, hide the overhand right and the left hook behind that jab. I mean, there's no real better way to explain other than that Copeland saw what was working, didn't change it up, didn't find the need to change it up overly. Because I mean, the only changes he really made were clinching with him and also being able to hide the strikes behind the jab by the second round. For Hayes, his biggest problem, as we said, he didn't change anything up, he didn't adapt, and he probably really couldn't find what his problem was, which was, I think, his footwork and also his defense. He didn't have any crazy reach advantage, but he was still trying to put his arm out there as if he's trying to set something up, utilizing any kind of reach advantage, but he couldn't find it, obviously, and that was the biggest problem, not being able to fix his defense or change anything throughout the entirety of the fight.
All right, so moving this thing forward, I wrote in the Sunday Morning Corner Man, which will be coming out probably tomorrow, ironically, Tuesday. So I wrote that what I like for Josh Copeland next would be like Derek Maiman. So the heavyweight division isn't overly stacked. Maiman just had a title fight. He lost it. I think that if we set those two guys up, it maybe gives us an idea what we have in Copeland. You agree with that?
I wouldn't be opposed to it. I mean, you're right. That heavyweight division is certainly not primed for any contender right now, as of now. So I think Copeland. Honestly, that the heavyweight division is somewhat new, just like the light heavyweight division, despite the fact that it's been around in the World Series of Fighting just as long as any other division, I believe. But if they can start signing some guys, or if some of these guys start really putting a streak together, you might start seeing some contenders start to get laid out here. But Copeland definitely, with a big win in the co-main event of a big event like this one, definitely calls for a reason to put him next as the next contender for the title.
Yeah, and I think that I don't want to say the World Series of Fighting missed a big opportunity, but the obviously the pun there with the heavyweight division. But I think that finances are what they are when it comes to being one of the big three, but you're the third highest promotion. You're the third ranked in that pecking order behind UFC and Bellator. Matt Mitrione would have been an interesting guy to bring into this heavyweight division. So, but finances being what they are, Mitrione probably had big demands. Bellator has those bottomless Viacom pockets. It's a little bit different than the World Series of Fighting, but that would have definitely been an interesting guy to add to the heavyweight mix. All right, so let's move on to a guy who probably would have gotten a performance bonus if that's what the World Series of Fighting did. Lewis Taylor, he defeated Corey Davila by technical submission, standing guillotine choke. Very reminiscent of what John Jones did to Lyoto Machida. It was quick, Nick, so let me get your thoughts on this fight.
Well, man, that was crazy. I mean, what is it? I believe Taylor came forward, threw a jab, and then ducked under it, tried to go for a takedown. And the second he did, Taylor was just on it like a piranha. It just came after his neck, saw the neck exposed. The second it was under, Davila panicked and, started moving backwards immediately. And that's kind of what signaled Taylor, okay, I got this. So he pushed forward and immediately cranked on it. And the second the cage was there, it just allowed him the balance to, sink it in even deeper than it already was. And sure enough, it put Davila to sleep. So, I mean, all around, it was such a tactful move. I mean, he knew the second he had his neck. Davila kind of gave it away. Like I said, he moved backwards the second his head was sunk in there. And I think more than anything, that's what gave Taylor the signal to sink it in. And so, perfect performance by Taylor. I believe it was 30 seconds. And, middleweight, again, is a division where you've got a contender. He certainly earned it. Clifford Starks will compete in the main event of the next event, or his fighting 30. But you certainly want a contender after that fight is over. And I think Taylor certainly prime himself as the next guy in line for the winner of that fight.
I agree with you completely. Here's the issue, and I wrote about this again in the Sunday Morning Corner Man. So what I find interesting about this fight is that the champion of this division is a two-weight champion. So if you're looking at a guy like David Branch, right, he's going to fight April 2nd against Clifford Starks. So also on that card, although there was a little bit of Twitter misunderstandings or miscommunications today with Vinny Magalhaes, but Vinny Magalhaes is fighting Jake Hewen. So Vinny Magalhaes has been sort of making overtures towards that 205-pound belt for a while. So if he fights on the same card as David Branch does, that sets up a late summer, fall fight between Magalhaes and Branch. So the 185-pound belt might not be defended again until next year. So if you're Lewis Taylor, You just had a short fight. Impressive. You beat the number 2 guy in the division. So, I mean, in the interest of staying busy, do you take another fight? Do you wait it out? I mean, what would you do if you were Lewis Taylor, knowing that your champion of your division has to, is defending 2 belts?
Yeah, good point. I mean, he certainly could take another fight, and it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who the World Series is fighting considers high ranked. I mean, it could just end up being somebody that they bring in. Obviously, if Taylor were to lose that fight, it would certainly, it's a risk. Definitely, it's a risk. And sometimes in this business, you got to take risks, and fighters got to fight. And that's the problem you have when you have a guy who has 2 belts. It certainly depends on what happens with Branch. I think that if he were to, I mean, this fight's April 2nd. So I'm thinking if Branch fights, win or lose, if he's overall healthy enough to compete in the summer, that sets up the match then, and he could fight for the belt against Branch or Starks, whoever wins. I mean, it's probably in Taylor's best interest that Starks wins his belt, because then he could fight for this. Then he could fight for the title as soon as the late summer or the early fall himself. So. I mean, there's many scenarios in which this can play out. If Branch does defend his title, then you're right. He has to defend his light heavyweight belt afterwards, and then he is looking at a long timetable. So I think that for now, Taylor's going to wait to see how that fight plays out. The World Series of Fighting, I'm sure, is going to do the same. And depending on how it goes, I'm sure if Taylor wants to take the fight, it's a risk. It's always going to be a risk, but it's a paycheck at the end of the day that I'm sure he wants. So. It's ultimately up to Taylor if he wants to secure his spot. But at the same time, we haven't even the World Series of Fighting themselves hasn't really established him as the next contender. And I mean, it would seem that he is, but you never know. I mean, there will be more middleweight fights. There will be more guys fighting in the middleweight division, trying to vie themselves as the next contender. So the division will continue to move forward, and who knows what we see by then. So it's really, really hard to tell, especially with a guy like Branch, who has 2 belts, that leaves that kind of an open timetable. So, like I said, I think it's in Taylor's best interest that Starks wins his belt.
Yeah, and maybe that's part of the reason why the World Series of Fighting was not that adverse to Branch vying for 2 belts, winning the 2 belts, because at the end of the day, 205 is a little deeper than 85 is, and but neither one is so deep that you can't defend both. So basically, it's one big division for Branch to sort of test himself against. Now, what I put in the Sunday Morning Corner, man, in terms of what's next for Taylor is Krasimir Mladenov is the guy who Clifford Starks beat before he got the fight with Branch. So for me, that just made a lot of sense. If you think that you have something in Lewis Taylor, you can sort of put him on the Clifford Starks path to the title. And then that way, there's another fight for Taylor. We know what we have in him, because I think that at the end of the day, the World Series of Fighting was probably figuring Corey DeVello would just, he was a second-ranked fighter. He was going to win, and that would be that. But Lewis Taylor had other plans, and here we are. So I throw him against the last guy that fought Starks before he went for the belt, and then we could just sort of have like a conveyor belt situation where that's what gets you to the title. All right. Moving on to this fight. Yeah, this fight is a little bit, I'm going to really leave this fight to you because it left me super flat. So much so that even in my mind, I really don't know. I'm having difficulty distinguishing the guys, and I don't know. This fight just didn't really do a lot for me. Chris Holcomb and Josh Cavan, split decision. I had one. I'm guessing it was the second for one guy, the third for the other. Clearly, I want to say it was Holcomb's fight in the second and Cavan's fight in the third, and then the split decision came because of the first. What are your thoughts on this fight? Did you draw more from this than I did?
I scored it 2-1 Cavan. I was actually surprised by the scorecards there. It was a close fight. I did think it came down to that second round. I thought Cavan did enough in the first. I mean, if you look at the fight, I mean, Cavan ended the fight on top of 2 rounds. He certainly landed a lot of mile ground and pound. He was on top of the majority of the rounds that I believe that he won. And then in the second round, in which I thought was that I did give to Holcomb, he landed some good strikes. He threatened Cavan with a finish by nearly punching him out against the cage. But I didn't. But if you go by scoring, I thought that Cavan won that fight. But you're right. I mean, it was somewhat of a flat fight because Cavan was implementing such a wrestling-heavy, game plan, but even then, he wasn't doing much damage. He was doing mild damage, like I said. He would get him, and then he would try to pick his shots. But he wasn't even landing anything overly significant. And that was probably his biggest problem, not landing anything to where it told the judges, okay, this guy's putting a beating on this guy. It wasn't that kind of fight. And so, that's probably what left it, too close to the judges to call, in which they decided to go over with Holcomb instead of Cavan like I did.
I'm glad you said everything you just said, because it's starting to refresh my memory a little bit on this fight. So I remember it being a stand-up fight for Holcomb, and Cavan was going for takedowns. Now, he didn't get the takedowns to the extent that he wanted to get them. He tried for a lot more than he got. And I remember Chael saying, even towards the end of the fight, that Cavan finally got the position he'd been seeking out the entire fight in the third round. So do you think a little bit with the judges? I mean, obviously, judges, the old saying, judges be judges. But do you think maybe that's it? Maybe they didn't feel like Cavan was executing his game plan as well as Holcomb was executing his?
Well, one of the very main cliches about judging is that many people want to say that good defense is also something that should be considered in scoring. But when you look at it, Cavan, yeah, like you said, Chael had mentioned that he'd been looking for a specific type of position, which was on top, and he didn't get that very often, but he would get them at the end of rounds, which I think is important. Like I said, I remember in the first round, I was just kind of baffled because I think he had gone for like 5 takedowns, like within a minute, each of which because of the fact that he would try and go for a takedown that would pin Holcomb against the cage, and Holcomb would kind of fight it off, but Cavan would throw some knees in there, some mild punches to the body or to the shoulder or to the head or something. But he was working, Holcomb on the feet wasn't landing anything in the first and third rounds, the rounds of which I thought Cavan won. That was too excessive, really. And at the same time, Cavan was having a hard time getting into the ground until the end of the round. When you look at the overall assessment of who did more of what, I gave it to Cavan the first and third rounds because getting on top and doing damage with the ground and pound that he did was more than any damage that Holcomb in the first and third rounds was able to do in stand-up.
I certainly see that logic, and I thought that a little bit when I first saw the decision. It seemed a little bit off. All right, let's take a run through the rest of the fights. We'll hit them quick, and then we'll get on out of here. So, and this one is interesting for me. Ian Heinisch against Vogel. Tyler Vogel. So for me, Heinisch came out like, and again, I hate to be repetitive. I should already have my article out, and it would seem less repetitive than when it comes out. But you can only have so many thoughts about a fight. So Heinisch to me came out like he was like a man that was on fire in the first round. He was a local kid. He looked like he was excited. The adrenaline was going. And by the second, he looked like he was just gassed. But yet Tyler Vogel, the fresher man in the second, I didn't see really like we talked a little bit earlier about with Mike Hayes. I didn't see the urgency there. It didn't look like he wanted to go and get the fight when it was there for him. So I'll give credit to Heinisch in the sense that he looked great attacking on all levels, kicking and striking and kicking the legs in the first, and then even in the second and the third. The second he was a warrior trying to hang in there even though he was visibly gassed. In the third he went for the takedown and sort of stayed active enough to not get it stood up. So I think strategically for a young fighter he fought a really smart fight despite what kind of faculties he had. So what's your take on this fight?
I kind of agree with everything you just said. Really, like I said, there was an impactful first round, and then it sold out in the second, and then. But I agreed with the decision. I believe the right man won that fight. That's my overall assessment. Is basically everything you said.
All right, what about Josh Huber and Clay Weimer? Anything on that? Is there anything that stands out to you, or just 30-27s all across the board? Huber wins.
Yeah, I actually had the opportunity to talk to Weimer after this fight. He was like hanging out behind me after the fights were over, and I recognized him, and I went to talk to him. And his nose was broken, and I asked him when in that fight did that happen? He tells me it happened in the first round, and it gave him a lot of difficulty with breathing, and it slowed him down, and he wasn't, and it was something that was on his mind. And also, going into this fight, his opponent I believe was 15-9 or 15-4. I'm not exactly sure, but Weimer going in with 6-0, and I asked him, do you think that the discrepancy in experience here played a factor? And he didn't want him making excuses, but he could tell that this was a guy that's been there, done that, while he's still trying to figure everything out for a guy that's really trying to adapt this fight, who's changing it up, who's out-striking him, and then even when he's out-striking him, he's keeping him honest with changing it up by hitting him against the cage and trying to do some offense there, and even on the grappling side of things, he was definitely making it a hard time for him overall throughout the entirety of the fight. Added the fact that he broke his nose with a solid punch in the first round, Weimer just had a overly difficult time, and so he gave all the props to his opponent. He's a tough kid, and he certainly seemed humbled by this experience. So I like him. I like Weimer, but great performance by his opponent. I thought that this was a decent fight, and certainly for a guy like him, I think it's a great learning curve for him overall. So I thinking back on it, it's what you gotta love about MMA. Seeing guys like that go in there and learn, and not only learn but also take what they can get out of each fight. Especially when you lose, you learn more. So overall, I like the fight in hindsight. So, and I even became a fan of Weimer, even though he lost. Just being able to talk to him.
Yeah, and you get, like you said, I mean, we're in a position where we get a unique perspective from these guys, and a young guy like that who hasn't fought a lot, probably has never had his nose broken before. So this will be, you learn to deal with adversity differently. Yeah, and you get, like you said, I mean, we're in a position where we get a unique perspective from these guys, and a young guy like that who hasn't fought a lot, probably has never had his nose broken before. So this will be, you learn to deal with adversity differently. The next time he gets in a fight, and he feels some adversity, he's gonna harken back on the time he broke his nose, time this or that. That's the benefit of experience. It's not just experience in terms of what you've done well and how many ass whippings you've thrown guys. It's how many times have you been in harm's way, and how many times have you been out in the deep water and found the shore, and that's kind of what Heinisch did in his fight. He started to feel some adversity and still pulled through. And maybe this is, like you said, learning experience for Weimer. All right, a couple of young guys we're going to end the podcast with. Brandon Royval, I mean, he had an absolute highlight reel knockout of Danny Maness. So and it just seemed like it kind of was there for him. Maness was looking for the takedowns, and he kind of just walked into the knee. Do you think that this was kind of what we're going to see from Royval moving forward, or did he just kind of luck into catching a guy leaning?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to tell with young guys who you don't see too much of. I mean, obviously, this is the first I've seen Royval, but and I mean, it wasn't like this was a sweet fight for him. I mean, he got dropped by Maness, and not that it was anything overly excessive kind of shot that would put any guy away, but Royval got hurt by a left hand by Maness early on in the fight. He scrambled, got basically scrambled back from the guard, swept, and once Maness got on top of him. And but overall, Royval looked smart in there because despite getting hurt early, he was able to keep himself composed. The second he was able to scramble back over to his feet, he starts landing several combinations, I remember, and then he threw that high kick where he was just fortunate that the knee was what landed across the face of Maness, and that's got the finish for him. When it comes to what we might see from Royval, I mean, he seems like a guy who's smart, who keeps his wits about him despite the adversity that he faced while he was in there. So I'm thinking that it could be somebody that could certainly get a meaningful streak going in the World Series of Fighting. I mean, it certainly looks like a possible diamond in the rough. And when you start your career or in the promotion with a highlight reel knockout like that, you're certainly giving yourself a good recipe for success moving on.
And I like what he did in the post-fight where he said that he was a natural flyweight. The reason why I like that is because he just took, I believe Bantamweight's head off with a knee. So that lets the World Series of Fighting know, listen, I can fight at a couple of weights here. It makes people want to anticipate what you would do. Flyweight division's a little thin. So maybe that's kind of a nice, a kid that's sharp enough to think that that's important to say his true weight in the post-fight. He seems like he's got a good head on his shoulders, like you said. All right, so last guy I want to talk to you about, and I don't know how much you know about this guy. I've just been hearing some buzz. If you know nothing, then you'll know as much as I know because the match was dark. But there's a lot of buzz this weekend about Justin Gonzalez. So he fought the last fight of the amateurs. Carlos Silva was talking about him, which obviously anytime that happens, it's good news for you. So, was there a buzz in the building about Justin Gonzalez? Did I just kind of luck into hearing enough things about him randomly, or was there a real buzz for the kid?
I mean, what was it? He had an amazing crowd already show up early for his fight. I mean, he certainly had a nice hometown welcome there for him in that fight. And I mean, man, it was an amateur fight, but he made Patrick look kind of like an amateur. He was able to just overpower him with his strikes. I mean, he was coming forward. He was implementing a pace that was aggressive. That was you could just tell it was suffocating for Davis to have to deal with early. And you know, man, he just made himself look like it was child's play for him. I mean, he came forward, blitzed them in a way that just made him look like he was the sharper, more crisper technical striker as well. So I mean, when you look at that fight, you think, man, this guy knows exactly what he's doing. He dictates this fight. This was his fight to lose. Essentially, within a minute in, you're thinking that because the guy was already doing so much. Definitely, I think that's a guy. If he decides to go pro, which I think he certainly looks like he could be ready for that already. So I mean, if he decides to do that, man, Lightweight's going to have a fun new guy.
And you know, there's certain things you like about the kid on a lot of different levels. Okay, so he's a local kid, born and raised in Greeley. He's got a good look, great nickname, J Train. He's
J-Train, yeah.
Yeah, so little things, Nick, they add up. You know, the fact that I think the number, and listen, if I'm quoting this, I'm quoting it right, the number could be wrong. I think Ray Sefo said he sold like $15,000 worth of tickets. That seems high. I remember the quote specifically, though, so I know I'm quoting it correctly. But that seems high. But anyway, if he did that, then that shows...
he might be right. Because seriously, there was this, I mean, first of all, like I said, this was when the amateurs were fighting before the prelims even got underway. And this guy had a bunch of people cheering him on in the crowd. Like, I mean, the biggest portion of the crowd that was there was rooting for him when I was there, and they were behind me just going nuts. And I was just like, wow, this guy has quite the following out here. So, I mean, whether that's true or not, I'm not entirely sure, but, I mean, it could be. He certainly did some good promoting for his fight especially.
And that's what I mean. I mean, he's doing everything that as a promoter you'd want him to do. He's going out and bringing in his own crowd, which in certain promotions that's important. World Series of Fighting is one. He not only did he bring all those people out, he delivered. So as I'm looking at Tapology.com, which I lean on sometimes, actually I lean on a lot. They have a unique way of bringing forth information that I like. But what I'm looking at now is 5th ranked of 818 active U.S. Western amateur lightweights, 1st ranked of 90 active Colorado amateur lightweights. So the kid's got credentials. I mean, he could be ranked in any number of those, and he's 5th and 1st. So he obviously came and put a show on. So I think Justin Gonzalez might be a guy that we keep our eye on. Much like how they signed Bryce Mitchell, Gonzalez, should he go pro, could be next. So it makes things interesting moving forward for the World Series of Fighting. All right, Nick, go ahead and hit me with your final thoughts. We'll touch a little bit on the next card, and then we'll get out of here.
Well, again, I thought this card was amazing. It certainly seemed like it was packed out. Good turnout from some fighters, too. You had Joe Warren there, Pat Barry there, Rose Namajunas there. A lot of good quality guys that were there that showed up and in support of this fight. And Matt Brown was there. I forget that he was there. He was there momentarily, it seemed, because he was sitting somewhere, and then he wasn't there for the rest of the night. Weird. He might have been cornering somebody. I don't know. But, good turnout overall. All the VIP seats were taken. It seemed like the stands were filled. And, of course, like I said, it was an amazing event. So I think that this is one of the more successful events that the World Series of Fighting has put on this year. And looking forward, I can't wait for World Series of Fighting 30. That middleweight title fight is something something that I can't wait to watch. I've been a big supporter of Clifford Starks and David Branch. I like both guys, and I've just been wanting to see the fight for the longest time, and so I really can't wait. And I'm hoping they give us a good card. It's in Vegas. It's a great opportunity for them to put on a wild show. So I can't wait.
Perfect segue into how I was going to end. So, the card's looking good so far. What we know, this is now what we know. We know, obviously, David Branch and Clifford Starks at the top. Joao Zeferino and John Fitch, the co-main event. That's a big fight. We know Vinny Magalhaes and Jake Hune. That's probably a fight for the next guy to fight Branch at light heavyweight for the belt. And then I think Danny Davis is fighting. The guy's name escapes me, but when I saw the fight, and it's a name I'd butcher anyway. But when I saw the fight, I was like, okay, that's gonna be a good one too, because I knew the guy, but I couldn't. But his name's not something that pops on the top of your head. So it's looking like a good card. And Vegas, Vegas.
Abu Azaitir.
There you go. So Vegas will typically bring out some of the local celebrities. A lot of gyms in Vegas. Last time we were there, I think Jason Ellis was there. Felice Herrig was there. So Hard Rock's going to be jumping, as always. So you never know who's going to show up at a Vegas show, obviously, because it's in Vegas. So it'll be interesting to see. And there's another guy, a celebrity. I butcher his last name. Dan Blazarian or something. He was there for a couple minutes. So it gets crazy in Vegas, to say the least. I'm excited about the card. I'll be there. I'm pretty certain you'll be there, right?
I will be there, yes.
Absolutely.
Confirmed. I got to talk to Mike Aframoa. Shout out to him. I got to meet him. He's a great dude. And so, yes, I will be there.
Absolutely. That's awesome. So we can do some of this stuff live. So that's pretty much all we had on this fight. Please follow us. I'm at the Hot Cage Daily. Nick, where can they follow you?
At Nick the Phantom on Twitter. I also have my own podcast, the MMA Discussion Podcast. You can get that on iTunes. I'm having problems on iTunes right now, though, so we're best available on SoundCloud and Stitcher. I will be talking to Clipper Starks next week on my podcast. Excited about that one. Hopefully we'll get David Branch on there. It'd be an interesting three-way conversation if I can get that to happen, but we'll see. Otherwise, thank you guys for listening on here. Thank you guys for listening on my podcast. Appreciate all the love.
All right, sounds fantastic. So until the next post-fight show, this is John Franklin for Nick. Nick, almost called you Nick Starks. For Nick Peralta. We'll see you next time. Enjoy the fights. Make sure you comment on the videos and let us know kind of what you guys want in the coming weeks as far as World Series of Fighting goes. And make sure you let the fighters know that we've mentioned them on our podcast. All right, guys. We'll see you next week. Take it easy.